Well, thank you, Sarah, so much, and Stan, for the opportunity to come here and speak to all of you today. It's been great to meet you all of you over the last day and a half. I'm just glad it worked out, Sarah. Some of you did get a little bit of my story, but through just direct conversations either at lunch or maybe in the morning over coffee. I thought for this short presentation that I'm doing, I would use the part of it to really just talk to you about a little bit what I'm doing, talk to you about what the model is and where we were playing, and then the balance of it to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've learned about entrepreneurship working in a variety of environments. As many of you may know from the side conversations we've had, I work for an investment firm called CEED, the Small Enterprise Assistance Funds, and that was set up 25 years ago, actually, to invest in small and medium-sized enterprises in emerging markets. And it was really set up as a response of the US government looking at the fall of the Berlin Wall and what needed to happen in Eastern Europe for those economies that were coming out of a socialist or communist structure. And we were set up, we're not a government entity at all, but we were a separate organization set up as an NGO in Washington, but it was going to actually do for-profit investment funds in these different environments. That meant country-specific funds with local teams. When I came to work for CEED, they were already pretty established and were in several markets at that point. And my experience was both on the investment side, working directly with companies that we were placing capital into, mainly equity, where we would take a minority stake in companies, as well as, I would say, on some of the more consulting side of the business. I worked a lot specifically with our companies that were export-oriented, that were placing products and services in Western Europe or specifically in the United States. And although we're not sector-specific, I did a lot of work myself in building products and food products, and I got to know a lot of these entrepreneurs really well. I got to spend time at their places of business, and to get to know their teams, their products. I got to see them at trade shows. I got to see them with other investors or bankers. So I kind of got a very 360 view of what an entrepreneur's life is like, how hard they work, the stress that they're under, the things that they're trying to accomplish, the dreams that they're trying to turn into a reality, the responsibilities that they have to their workers, to their families, to their communities. Oftentimes, as they become more successful and become employers in their communities, people look to them as role models. And that really had made a big impression on me. And I thought about the mission of what my investment organization was doing. And we said we were serving small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, which we still have done, but we were doing it in very, very surgically. We'd go into a country and we'd do 10 investments. And that was driven by the model that we had, and we had to make sure that enough were successful, or successful enough, that we made a return on the investment. And then we could look at the impact. We could look and say, invested in these 10, what kind of an effect did it have on the community there, in terms of how many suppliers they worked with, jobs, revenues, a lot of different outcomes. But I always had this kind of weird feeling that we would work so hard to place money because the absorption ability was very low in a lot of the markets that we were in, which is very hard you could go into a market and have $1 million, and it'd be very, very hard to find a company that could accept $1 million and actually turn that into a profit for you 5-6 years down the line. And there was just sometimes just not knowing about the financial instrument of equity. Other times it was just the capacity of the company. So that being said, I got to do a kind of a review of some of our portfolio companies, and I spent a whole summer in Eastern Europe. It was great, and I got to meet all these companies. I worked with them, and I was doing an evaluation for the company, and then I realized, wow, I started to see these trends. I'd see an entrepreneur that we made a lot of money with, a lot of money, and he was a horrible delegator, horrible. Great salesperson, horrible delegator. Really didn't know how to build a team at all. And then I would find, another company where they were pretty good better at delegating. Their networks were very good in one city or one part of the country, and they weren't selling anything in another part of the country. And they had no idea how to open those connections. And sometimes that was a consequence of politics or war or other things that might have happened, but they weren't taking advantage of what I saw was a natural opportunity. So I'll fast forward. With that being said, I went back to my company and said, if we really do want to serve people in underserved markets, maybe there's more we can do. We should continue to do investing, that's our core, but maybe we could do something more. Maybe we could take what we've learned about investing and working with these kinds of entrepreneurs and kind of package it in a way that fits their lifestyle and basically offer a program, is what I called it at that point, that they might respond to. My bosses, to their credit, said, okay, you can do it. And they said, sure, but you've got to find the money and you've got to basically do an internal startup. And if you can, we'll invest some, but if you can make this work, you own it. You're running it. It's your social enterprise, your thing. If not, I have a great letter of recommendation that I can give you when you go on to your next job. So, I was, happy, but I went home to my not soon-to-be wife at that point and said, guess what? I got an opportunity. And if it goes bad, well, I'll find another job. So anyways, they let me do it, and this is kind of how it started to build out. So I think, just as a point of background, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I think it's important when you get some context. We all in this room know how important entrepreneurs are, and that they're, like I said, the backbone of healthy economies. I would say that in the economies where I'm working, specifically in Eastern Europe and in North Africa and the Middle East, they are extremely important. Not only just to social cohesion, but very importantly to social cohesion, but also in terms of the prosperity and opportunities that people have. And I think I saw a statistic the other day that 75 million young people are unemployed in the world. Well, I can tell you that in some of the markets I work in, over 50% of young people don't have jobs. That's a very high level of human talent that is underutilized, and it's if I could put on a different hat, sometimes that there's actually a security issue around that as well. And so I'm happy to be doing what we can do to help in these markets. I think it's also important to look at entrepreneurship too, in the sense that what we've heard here this morning, what we heard here yesterday, it's not just about creating jobs, although entrepreneurs do, and that's why a lot of governments back it, because they want to see jobs created. But they really, they do the market disruptions. They come out with new products, new services. They can really change a whole system and ideally support a higher standard of living. Just a couple of statistics that are important for me. In most of the countries that we work in and invest in, 80% of the companies are small, medium-sized enterprises. And how we define that, I use a European definition. It actually goes pretty large. It goes up to almost like 50 million. Okay, it's a pretty big firm. But most of the firms are probably in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range to maybe $1 million, a little more than $1 million. But that's really the fabric of those societies. And also importantly, they provide most of the jobs. So, in a lot of markets I work in, there's a lot of focus on startups, and that's rightfully so. It should be there. It's important to have, especially young people, but not always young people, starting new businesses and coming up with new ideas, because we don't know where the next good ideas are going to come from. So the fact that someone goes through that process of starting a business, learning the skills, even if they fail, and in my experience, most of them do fail, they come out at the other end of that as just a much better prepared person. But again, it is important to think about those companies that may not be investment targets, but are growth companies, maybe even family companies that do employ people, that have a foothold, do have customers in those markets. The program, I think I went to the next one here. Well, this isn't quite a clicker. I'm actually just sending a signal back to Stan. I think what I have learned about entrepreneurs is that in the environments I'm in, the ecosystems have a lot of holes. And even here in the US, the conversations I've heard over the last 2 days, we're not perfect at it either. But in the countries I'm working in, there are very obvious, evident holes. So you may have entrepreneurs, and then there might be a business environment where the legal framework is at least acceptable, but it's not ideal in terms of starting a business or in terms of some of the tax laws that they face. There are universities, but they're really buildings. They're not necessarily resources that these entrepreneurs can tap into. The students coming out of the universities are oftentimes not, they are book smart, but they don't have skills that are applicable to what these businesses are doing today in these countries. Finance, huge holes in the finance area. We have there are banks in every country I've ever done work, but the collateral requirements that they have, oftentimes 3 to 1, it's impossible. And I want a $100,000 loan, I need to have $300,000 in collateral. I mean, it's a non-starter for most of the companies. So the fact that we're even finding growth entrepreneurs that have somehow navigated that through friends and family and other ways is a testament to themselves, how much they've done. But it shows that if you can start to fill in some of the pieces, they're kind of battle hardened. They can take advantage of the opportunity to grow. I won't bore you, but you can see in terms of the idea of passion. I started out as a kind of a person working in a certain line of the business that was more on the investment side. But my passion for the entrepreneurs, partly just because of my ability to interface with them and the opportunity I had, really drove this CEED organization in terms of where we wanted to go as a team and what we thought that these entrepreneurs needed. Our mission, I won't read the slide to you, but it is our belief that entrepreneurs, when they do have that support, when they do have access to mentors, and that their skill sets, we've seen them develop very, very quickly, and they just become much more competitive. Our model, we talked a lot about different C's here the last couple of days. These are the C's that I typically focus on in terms of community, connections, capital, and capacity. And the one insight that I really picked up doing this is that this was going to lead directly into our business model. To make this work in a country, I couldn't parachute in and parachute out. I wasn't going to go to Macedonia, a country of 2 million people in the former Yugoslavia, and talk to people about how to be better entrepreneurs. That wasn't going to work. But I did have some resources that might work there. So the issue for me was I needed to make this organic. They had to be locals who were going to run this, but not just a local to do a project, a local who understood this was an entrepreneurial opportunity. So the way I sold this to the right directors was, do you want to be your own boss? What do you mean, do I want to be my own boss? I said, you've worked for, I'll give you an example of this one gentleman named Jovan. He'd worked for a foreign donor for a while, which is a pretty highly paid position in his country. It's a very secure position. But I knew about him through some networks I had, but he was restless. This guy was a natural entrepreneur. And I said, do you want to be your own boss? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I have an opportunity here. We're doing this. I didn't even use the word social enterprise. I said, we're putting together a project at that point. I said, but I really want to make it more than a project. I want to make this turn into something that's going to be here for years to come, long after any initial funding is here. I said, think of it this way. I'll come up with a little bit of capital to start something, and you get the opportunity, not even on your own dime, to build something here. So in the worst case scenario, if you're not successful in 2.5 or 3 years, you will have had an amazing experience, you will have learned a ton of things, and you will have been able to manage something by yourself for a significant period of time. And you're not doing it on your own. I'm here to help, I have a team behind me, but you are going to be the face of this organization here locally. Does that appeal to you? Now, I had many people who heard that pitch, and they said thank you, and they walked out, because they didn't want that. And then there were the people who were the entrepreneur types who, when they heard that, they wanted it. Because then they knew that, hey, they were going to build something, and at the end of the day, all of a sudden, I get to use somebody else's money to build kind of an entity here, and I'm going to be in front of the most important people in my country? Yeah, I'll do it. I'll definitely do it. And that was an amazing thing to find those kinds of people. And also played into the business model, because I really lifted the model that we had used from the investment side, which was I did have a bias towards companies that had a little bit of a proven track record. They didn't have to be big, but they had to be companies that had some revenues. They had to show some test in the market that what they were offering had some viability, and there was an acceptance for it. And that also allowed us, when we went into the market, to charge for some services. Maybe not a market rate, but my school of thought, only my opinion, if people paid for it, they valued it. And that was sometimes contrarian to some of my initial groups that backed us. This is just kind of a big picture thing. I don't know if you can see all the numbers there. On the investment side, that 20 million, those are companies that receive money outside of my firm. So my firm invested in a few companies, probably closer to the $10 million mark, but I didn't count that. This is more just outside, whether they got it from banks or other investors in the space. But as you can see, just based on the numbers, we're in a variety of countries now, but we're really starting to hit on all levels. We're doing over 500 events a year in all these 13 countries. We've had actually activities in over 20, even though I don't have full centers or staffs in those other countries. And you start hitting an interesting output number of the entrepreneurs. What was more important to me is a number that's not up there, which were members. That entrepreneurs, in my experience, at least the ones I've been dealing with over the years, if I went to them and I sold them training, that was a race to the bottom. No entrepreneur I've ever met in my whole life ever woke up in the morning and says, I want to go get trained. Never, not one. But I've met 1,000 entrepreneurs that say, I can't sleep, I wake up at 4 in the morning because I don't know how I'm going to make payroll next month. Or, Pete, I'm selling to my customers and I'm super frustrated because I could sell them so much more, but they just don't get it. They don't understand how much more I have to offer them or how to use it. That's my favorite entrepreneur. That entrepreneur that's stuck, that has something but stuck, that's my favorite one. And those are the ones that we went after because they had some ability to pay, but they were also ready to receive some input in terms of maybe doing something differently. Well, you can't even see that, sorry. On my computer, it looked a lot better. There's a lot of ocean here. But we basically, these are all the countries where we've been investing over the years, and the lighter colored ones are where I've done our CEED program and where we're expanding. This is just, I guess I would just call this some validation. These are some of the groups that have either given us some either direct financial support or have provided in-kind support in terms of either offices or resources that we've leveraged over the years. So that's kind of the background on what the program is. In terms of the balance of what I wanted to talk about in this short time up here is just a little bit about entrepreneurship and what I've learned, what I see outside of the United States. The entrepreneurship to me, I believe, is really about freedom. It's about independence, and it's about the ability to choose. As Sarah said, there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are entrepreneurs out of necessity. They don't have another option. A lot of the entrepreneurs that I have been blessed to work with have kind of gone past that phase. They're starting to go up the scale, and then it really becomes about determining their own destiny and taking responsibility for themselves, for their families, and oftentimes playing, as I said before, a very important role in their local communities. I think the other big thing for me is the mindset. I always get it, especially from tech entrepreneurs, like, we need to be the next Silicon Valley. And I keep saying Silicon Valley is not a place. All right, it is, it's in Palo Alto, but it's not a place. It's a state of mind. It's a culture. It's the way people interact. And if I take even the lessons from a Silicon Valley and I put it in Belgrade, Serbia, it's not going to be the same. But there are things you can learn from it. You just have to localize it and adapt it to your environment. I would say that in terms of the mindset, and you can read kind of where I'm coming from on that, that is, as you start seeing increased skills, that mindset, and increased ability to realize your potential, people become more flexible. And we talked about it here yesterday. There's no downside to people having an entrepreneurial experience, zero. If they go through that, they either become great entrepreneurs themselves, or they become great employees for government, for NGOs, or for just other businesses. And in terms of the entrepreneurial mindset, I think the gentleman, I think his name is Jim from Dell, who was here this morning, was getting at this too. In my experience, I've seen a lot of big firms who can really help foster the entrepreneurial ecosystem themselves as well. And how do they do that? When I talk to big corporates like IBM or others who are in a lot of the markets I'm operating in, I say, how you can do that? You can help this culture by opening up some of your supply chain, or maybe investing in some of these small companies themselves, because they might have a technology or skill that you want. But it's really a willingness to do something differently. And where I have seen corporates do that, it's amazing to see how their growth really starts to expand quickly in those particular markets. This was a chart for you, Sarah, in collaboration, right? I knew this is what this was all about. And I do think that entrepreneurs are inherently understand collaboration. But there's a but. Those barriers exist, and they're real. And when you start to go outside to some of the environments where I work, it's kind of like maybe what you see in the US, but times 10. They are, if you're not family, and if you're not a friend, I don't know you. And I'll talk to you, and I'll deal with you, I'll learn about what you do, but I don't trust you. And to get people to trust was a big thing. When I first started CEED, I would bring in groups and they said, well, how are you going to do this? You're going to bring in consultants? I said, nah. I said, we're going to use other entrepreneurs to teach other entrepreneurs. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm going to have an entrepreneur if they're an expert in marketing or finance, they're going to come and talk about their experience. We'll structure it, but then also use personal examples. I said, you don't know what you're doing, because no one's going to talk about what they do in front of this group, because they know him, they know his family. That's embarrassing. And I said, how else are they going to learn? And the big issue I learned was some techniques on how to do that well, but the biggest thing was a common experience. When people had a common experience and they went through, now again, I'll use the bad word training together, and if you placed them correctly, so they had the same issues that they were dealing with, they started to see each other differently. And it didn't happen in one meeting. It happened, meet a couple of times. And also, for me, I realized there was a strong social component that had to be enveloped in this. I was going to put this in my next slide, but maybe I'll jump to it, actually. It's about the biggest thing that I can say that we've contributed over the years, if you looked at the trainings and the money and the connections, I think is our biggest currency is trust. I'll give you an example. It's a pretty developed market now, but I was working in Slovenia and I needed to hire a director. And I really had trouble finding the right person. And then I found this person who, I looked at this person's resume, I was interested, and then I met this person. And I was with a panel of two other people that I trusted. Well, we interviewed this person and we all said, let's vote. I voted yes, they both voted no. And we disagreed. And I kind of invoked my authority and said, I'm going to overrule you on this one. We're definitely going with this person. And her name was Nina Bozic. And she had an interesting background. She had been a consultant for Deloitte. So she had the chops, she was very skilled. And she'd also been a professional actress. And I knew that was really important, because the first group coming in, when you start thinking about a demographic of small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, unfortunately, especially at that time, it's gotten a lot better, it tended to be men. It tended to be men between the ages of 28 and 35 in general. So, when I went in, we hired, I said, Pete, do you know what you're doing? Do you think she can run with this group? I said, absolutely she can. She knows exactly what she's doing, and her plan that she put together looked really, really good. And when it finally, but you never know until it actually happens. And two things, I knew I made a good decision. One, when we had our opening event, we had the press there and the government was there and all these things, she commanded the room, at ease in front of the camera. So that was a big plus. And the next one was, the next day we had our first event, training or thing that we were doing. And I called her because I couldn't find it. I didn't know where it was. And she's like, no, it's this address on this street. Here it is. I said, I'm standing in front of it. It's a billiards hall. This can't be it. She goes, no, that's the right place. Come on in. And it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was empty. And I said, oh, Jesus, I failed. I really screwed this up. And I walked in, and it was empty. It was dark. And then we went to this back room. Boop, the doors open. There was a big table. There was a whiteboard. 25 people in there getting trained. I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And we did this for 3.5 hours. It was a great session. And then open the doors, walk out. The beers are flowing. They're all playing pool. And I was like, Nina, how'd you think about this? She goes, Pete, come on. They're all 28 to 35. Most of these guys are single. I'd had them come out of their jobs at 4 in the afternoon. What else are they going to do? How else was it going to incentivize them? And then the other issue was, she's like, it's all about social bonds. If they don't connect with each other, how are we going to ever get them to connect on a level in terms of business? So that was a real eye-opener for me, and in the sense of just understanding truly a customer approach to doing economic development. That I had to look at the customer in terms of their hardcore needs that they have, make sure we're responding to that, but also understand the social situation and where they are. What are their lives like? Are they busy? Do they want to be home at a certain hour? What are their responsibilities? How do I design a program that they want to be a part of and can actually put aside their most precious resource, time, to do? I have another one here I wanted to talk about. This is a good friend of mine named Victor Huang, he writes for Fortune magazine, and he's an investor out in Silicon Valley for a company called T2 Ventures. And he wrote a really important book for me called The Rainforest. And he talks a lot about just maybe it's part of the secret sauce of Silicon Valley, but really about just innovation in general. Victor's a pretty deep guy. And we talked a lot about the new paradigm. And we've discussed a lot of these things actually here today. Kind of the old model from kind of control and command and production to kind of what that's transforming to. And as the world moves towards really the growth and the birth of many, many, many small companies, maybe the big companies are seeing their end of days in the next 20 or 30 years, it really is about how teams have other types of skills, technical skills, but also soft skills. How do they create together? How do they connect? If they have an idea, can they fail fast and cheaply? How do they reduce some of those social barriers? And that's kind of the work that we've been doing at CEED. How do they become more agile in this 3.0 world? Transparency. And at the last one, I would not underestimate values. Values are big, because if you ever want to have a culture where one wants to pay it forward, you have to have some shared values around that. Meaning that I have to believe that if I help you, Matt, that even if you don't help me back, at some point it's going to come around. I'm working with you because I have a certain skill set that you want. But at some point, as our groups kind of break apart and come back together, it'll work my way the next time. And that's a big thing that we talk about a lot about at CEED, is our values. And I think I'm running out of time, so I'll jump to a couple of examples here. Well, I won't bore you with the why. I think you know the why. But it really, in my experience, it's also making it not only accelerating development, it's making it sustainable. And then again, around the individual engagement, it's people incentivize themselves to really make this happen. That's not going to look like much. It's actually kind of a depressing picture if you look at it. But it's a very important one for who's in it and for where it was taken. I work in, I just wanted to give you a few examples of how you can transform culture. Dritan, who's this gentleman here, is running the company called Cactus, which is one of the leading ICT companies now. When I met him in Kosovo, but now it's actually one of the leading ones in Albania as well. The war in Kosovo, between Kosovo and Serbia, happened in 1999, or it finished then. And Dritan lost 2 of his family members in the war. And if you leave Pristina going out of the city towards Montenegro, there's a pretty big cemetery where there are quite a few thousand graves there for people who lost their lives. And so Dritan, as he became a member of ours, we benefited from the fact that we had the right incentives. Kosovars couldn't travel, so we would bring the network to them. Say, that's right, you want to join? Why should I pay you? Well, you should pay because we're going to have meetings in Macedonia to the south, 2-hour drive. I can bring in people from around the region that you normally can't meet because you can't fly to see them. So it was a good incentive to have people like Dritan, participate. But as he grew, he started to have more opportunities. And just to give you one other quick anecdote about the example of some of the tension that's between the two, that's scaring me. I happened to be in Belgrade on February 17th, 2008. That was the day that Kosovo declared independence. And I don't know if any of you remember the news, but it was a pretty dangerous day in Belgrade. There was a lot of the nationalists were out in the street. There was a protest of 250,000 people in the square. In my hotel, which is right beside it, I watched young men go down the alley and place sticks and bats all the way down it. And then after Kosovo declared independence and they finished it, I watched the festivities. And they burned the US Embassy, they bashed in all these McDonald's, KFCs, anything that had an American feel to it. Unfortunately, they were hurting themselves because the owner of the McDonald's and KFCs were probably Serbs. But it was an interesting thing to see. It was kind of scary. And my colleagues were like, Pete, you can't leave the hotel. You got to stay there. You can't come out. And nothing happened to me. It wasn't that big a deal at the end of the day. But I got a real feel for just how much animosity there really was there. So let me come back to Dritan. This picture was taken, 2.5 years ago? So it's been a few years. It's been about a decade or so since the real hostilities. And Dritan won a big contract for the EU, for countries that are coming to be part of the accession. So to do that, though, he has to be willing to serve all those countries. And one of them was Serbia. So that meant that he would have to go to Belgrade with his team, do certain sets of trainings. He'd have to do some consulting work with certain firms. And that also meant that he would have to go there, not maybe with any risk of personal harm at this point, but definitely a heck of a lot of harassment. Just by when he would speak, the taxi driver, anybody would know that he's from Kosovo. But he went, and he's gone multiple times. And that's what, for me, taught me about how entrepreneurs really are change makers. they can rise above politics. Now, there's a personal incentive for Dritan, okay? He's going there because there's a contract, there's some money involved in this. But there's a backstory that most people don't know. I know that he lost a brother and a sister in the war to the Serb troops. I know that he vowed never to go to Serbia after those things happened, and yet here he is. That was when I realized the power of what entrepreneurs can do. I like this one a lot. This guy's great. Yasser runs a company called Cassiope in Morocco, and he definitely has global aspirations for his company. Basically, it's a solution for government or other companies to do a kind of a vertical software solutions that require almost no coding. I'm quoting here because it's from Yasser's quote to me. He goes, "Pete, I can basically reduce implementation and go-to-market costs by 60%. So as part of CEED, as part of our connections, our community, I get them connecting to our network. And we have colleagues out in San Francisco at Sand Hill Ventures and a few other, Sand Hill Angels and a few other places. Let's go see them. And he went out and he spent some time there. And the reaction that he got, I won't say from who, but he did get a reaction that said, nothing this good could ever come out of Morocco. Nothing this good could ever come out of Morocco. Because Yasser had never lived in Palo Alto, he'd never studied in the US, he'd never spent any time in the US. But he's, it's an open source world these days, right? He's just a smart guy who had learned a lot of different lessons and learned how to apply them. And I think, what we realized with Yasser, just the power of innovation, that nobody has a dominion on innovation or talent. And then also what can happen when you have a connection. Now Yasser's just about to get a round of financing that finally did work out for him, so there's a happy end to this story. But it was a real eye-opener to him and to me to hear the reaction that he got. Another example, I happen to take this one from the same country just because it was kind of fresh in my mind, was Salima. And Salima, she's a pretty interesting person to meet in person. And this one really got to the point of view of just using connections again and really the understanding of community. Salima had worked for a multinational and a fast-moving consumer goods company, so she was a pretty skilled individual. And at one point, probably around 2009, 2010, said she wanted to start her own company. And she started doing it out of her mom's basement in her pharmacy in Casablanca. And it was basically a beauty products, which homemade beauty products, if any of you have traveled to North Africa, that's not that uncommon that people make their own. They don't always buy them in the marketplace. But she was using traditional Moroccan inputs like argan oil, like Moroccan clay. And she knew enough based on her background that she needed better packaging, stronger branding, and more established distribution channels. So what was available to her was basically selling in Morocco, which is basically a cash economy in a lot of ways, which is very difficult. If you can't go to a big client and they put in a big order, but they're not willing to give you 20 or 30% or anything down, it's very hard to finance that those kinds of orders. And then the other opportunities, she could do consignment with Dubai, but the margins weren't great. So she was saying, I really wanted to do something different. And when she joined CEED, she was deciding what she should continue with the business or not. And then she met a young man named Dries. And Dries was another Moroccan, but he had gone to school at the University of Miami. He had been educated here in the States, living back home, running his parents' logistics company. And they talked more about what they were doing, kind of, through the program. Said, why don't we do something together? Why don't we go into business together? He goes, you know how to make the products. You understand what sells. He goes, I know how to get it there. So basically, as of last November, they did a pretty big cosmetic show, I guess, in Miami. They went, they presented, they had their company, and now they're selling actually through South Florida their products. And that was a great, I can't take credit for anything like that. That just kind of happened organically among their connection. But that's what this is really all about. It's not about me or my team placing a deal. It's just creating the environment where those things can happen. Lastly, I think I wanted to talk a little bit about, in terms of changing lives, that's me, probably 10 pounds lighter and less facial hair. It was quite a few years ago. That entrepreneurship and innovation don't just happen with private companies. And a few of the people in the room, I did talk to them about this example. When my bosses said, hey, you can do this if you can finance it, or we'll write you a good recommendation, I had to go to start people I know and say, who would want to support this? I said, I have some money from my company, but I need a little bit more to kind of get this thing going. And I went to a gentleman I knew at USAID who worked in this particular geographic area. And I talked to him about it. And I really got lucky. in terms of a public-private partnership. I met somebody who was working for the US government who had been an entrepreneur in his previous life, who had built a leasing company, who went public with that leasing company, who didn't need to work again if he didn't want to. But this gentleman was a former Marine, a Vietnam vet, who had a certain sense of duty, who wanted to work for the government at that point. He had a skill set that was very valuable. He was a financial guy, and he had worked in a lot of the environments where I was active. And when I talked to him about this, he was very helpful in the sense that he didn't just say, well, what's the mechanisms we have at my agency? He looked at it and said, you're on to something. This is something that could work. How can I help you make this thing work? And we talked about what the mechanisms were available in terms of some basic funding. But he said, you understand, if you work with me, I'm going to be a taskmaster. If you want to run this as a project, I don't want to deal with you. If you want to do this because you think you can make something that'll last for a long period of time, I'm interested. And I said, that's exactly what I want to do. And he was fantastic. I mean, we get along really well now. We probably didn't get along well the first 2 years because he was really tough on budgets and everything else. He was really hard. And I will tell you one last anecdote, the power of technology. I was on a business trip and he happened to be on it with me because he wanted to see some of the firms. And I was writing back to my home office. It was after midnight and I was very tired. And I wrote back to my colleague, Tom, I said, God, this guy Steve is such an asshole sometimes. And I sent it. And then I realized, oh shit, I CC'd him on the email. So I go to breakfast in the morning and I'm already preparing all night. How am I going to say to this guy? And we sat down and I said, maybe I'll just ignore it, pretend like it didn't happen. And we sat down and we're eating. And then he looked at me and he goes, do you have something you want to say? And I said, I said, how do you play this? I said, Steve, one, I apologize that I may have sent an errant email to you, but I think you should know that the sentiment's still pretty true, okay? And he smiled and he said, all right, I can accept that. And then we talked a little bit about it and it was fine. But the point is he was a very unique individual within an organization that can be very hard to navigate sometimes. Now obviously it's changed. We've grown our program and we work with a variety of people now. But he taught me a lot about entrepreneurship in the public sector. That you don't have to, it's great if you're a private company owner, but you can be very entrepreneurial within the public sector too, as long as you have the freedom within your agency or department or whatever you're in to be able to think outside the box. So I've probably gone way over my time, but I would just say that, at the end, just to summarize, it's the openness, it's the reduction of social barriers, whether they be human constructs or others, that hunger for knowledge, and that dedication that I see in entrepreneurs and what they put into their companies, their business, but also how they understand that it's much bigger than them, that what they're doing is about all the people that they employ and about what effect it has even in their home societies. They understand their role in society and what they do. And that's why I'm always happy to champion them as heroes everywhere I go, because those are the people that can really make it happen. Thank you for your time.